Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Etienne Bacrot and Hikaru Nakamura. This was played in the 2012 Biel tournament in Biel, Switzerland, and without further ado, let's look at this game. Bacrot starts the game off by playing the move d4, and we have d5 by Nakamura. c4 and c6. So far it's the Slav defense, and after knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, and e6, it's the semi-Slav. e3, and now after knight bd7, queen c2, bishop d6, and bishop d3, we have the anti-Maran variation of the semi-Slav. d takes c4, and now bishop takes c4 by Bacrot. And what Nakamura did was to wait until Bacrot developed his bishop and then only capture on c4 to make it waste some time. And he does that as well after playing the move b5, and now Nakamura gets a good amount of development. He made Bacrot's bishop move 3 times, and now he's developed his bishop on the very nice a8 h1 diagonal. So here Bacrot plays the move e4, and the obvious idea behind e4 is to play e5 and fork the bishop and knight. So e5 was played by Nakamura. And now we have d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and f4. So after all of those trades and f4 is played, Nakamura needs to decide whether he wants to trade the bishop for the knight on c3, or if he just wants to play something like bishop d4. Well, the problem with playing bishop takes c3 is that first of all you give up your bishop pair, and secondly your remaining bishop that you have isn't really doing anything that much. So here Nakamura decides to maintain both of his bishops. So he plays bishop d4, and perhaps later on an idea is to play the move a6 followed by c5 to activate this bishop. So here we have e5, trying to attack the knight on f6, and now knight to d5 was played here by Nakamura. And with knight d5, he's trying to trade the knight on c3. Knight e4 was played here by Bacrot, and now knight to b4. And here, after this knight to b4 move was played, we can see that Nakamura is activating his pieces very efficiently, but Bacrot, it's a bit doubtful. And here it would have been interesting if Bacrot played the move knight d6 check. And it's interesting because he gets a centralized knight, and maybe he can use that as some compensation for his late development. The thing is, though, that Nakamura can actually play the move queen takes d6. And after e takes d6, knight takes c2 check, bishop takes c2, and now Nakamura could even just castle queenside. And after this is played, he has a good advantage. This d6 pawn might be rounded up. In fact, you don't even need to castle. You could just play rook d8, and there's a threat towards the d6 pawn, and if that pawn is fallen, then Nakamura definitely has a good advantage, considering that he is up material. So knight d6 check, while playable, would just result in the loss of a pawn from Bacrot, so instead, he plays the move queen to b3. Nakamura trades the minor pieces off, and unfortunately for Nakamura, he cannot play bishop f2 check and win the queen, because just knight takes f2, which would defend the queen on d3. So here Nakamura castles, because Bacrot cannot, and after knight to d6, bishop c5. And the reason is because now you cannot capture on b7 because you lose the queen, so just bishop to e3. Nakamura has to now capture on d6 because, well, capturing the bishop on e3 and then allowing queen takes e3 would just give a very strong knight in the center. So e takes d6 was played by Bacrot. And, well, this would have been all well if Bacrot had at least castled and maybe had a bit of more development with his rooks. But after queen h4 check, g3, and now queen to h5, Nakamura can ensure Bacrot that he's not going to castle. Here, Bacrot can castle, but if he does it, he's just in a very bad position. Just the simple c5, and there's nothing that Bacrot can do anymore. The threats are queen to h3, some other threats could even be maybe later on c4, rook a to e8, or rook a to d8, bring the other rook over to e8. It doesn't really seem like Bacrot has anything against Nakamura's king, whereas if you compare Nakamura's attack, there's a heavy attack, and it's really hard to say when this will end, or when Bacrot can even start his attack. So that is why Bacrot cannot really castle. Instead, he just played rook to c1. You can't castle queenside because it's simply illegal. So rook to c1, c5, giving up a pawn, but now queen to h3. And Nakamura has activated his bishop to a very fair extent. I mean, it's attacking this rook. And now, after rook to g1 is played, Nakamura now captures on h2. And he's not worried about queen takes b5 because it really doesn't bother him. After just simply bishop to f3, then his queen is way more active than what Bacrot's queen is even doing on b5. So here, Bacrot played rook to c2, and his idea is to try chasing the queen away from the h2 square, and hopefully trying to somehow consolidate the position and get a decent advantage for perhaps this very, very slow development he has. So queen to h3 by Nakamura, and now rook c7. Bacrot now attacks the bishop, and after bishop to f3 by Nakamura, this is already way better for Nakamura. It's because Nakamura has a lot more development, and it's really hard to see how Bacrot can improve his development. So he played king to d2, trying to at least double the rooks and do something like that, but queen to e6 by Nakamura. Now Nakamura is threatening the a2 pawn, but at the same time he's also threatening rook a to d8, which would put pressure on d6, or even rook f to e8, which puts pressure on this e3 bishop. So bishop to c5 is now played by Bacrot. And Bacrot is now trying to defend the d6 pawn because a lot of bad things can happen to that, especially rook coming to d8 and putting pressure on it. But also he's attacking the f3 bishop. So Nakamura plays bishop to g4, and now we have b3 by Bacrot. And Bacrot now, he's not really that bad, but he should just be a bit careful not to run into some problems. So here bishop to f5 was played, and this is exactly what I meant about problems that Bacrot ran into. Bacrot should actually just play the move queen to d4, or even queen to e3, and just try to trade the queens off. And after that, I would definitely prefer white in that position, because Bacrot has a lot more of an active rook and bishop. He can activate this rook later on, maybe bring it to the c-file, maybe cement this bishop on c5 after the trade of queens, push a3, and I would just favor Bacrot if he had played queen to e3 or queen to d4, something like that. But he made a humongous blunder by playing the move rook to e1. And I encourage you to pause the video and find the way that Nakamura instantly won. Okay, so perhaps Bacrot thought that after bishop takes d3 was played, then after the simple rook takes e6, f takes e6, and now king takes d3, maybe he could have gotten a good position from here because, well, I mean, he is down in exchange, but his bishop is very active, so it kind of compensates for him being down the exchange. And perhaps he has something, but it's not really clear what, but there could be something later on, like b4 and a attack towards g7 perhaps. But Bacrot thought about this the completely wrong way, and after rook e1 was played, Nakamura just took on e1 with check. And after this move was played, Bacrot resigned, because after king takes e1, just bishop takes d3. And now Nakamura is just up a rook, and there's no way of defending this. It would have been okay if he was just up in exchange, but him being up a whole rook is just too much. That's why Bacrot resigned after queen takes e1 check was played. So that was the game. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.